Welcome to the Hardwood Hustle, powered by PGC Basketball. We believe in the value of a coach. We're here to educate, empower, and encourage you to lead like never before. This week, Sam and TJ discuss 3 different situations in the NBA with Trae Young, Russel Westbrook, and Kyrie Irving, and the leadership lessons coaches and players can take back to their programs. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Hardwood Hustle. Sam and TJ here with you, and we're going to talk today about the NBA, and we're going to talk about 3 different things going on with the NBA and what we can learn from as coaches, as leaders, and as players as well. So TJ, let's dive in and let's start with where we live here in Atlanta and what the Hawks have going on. Recently, Trae Young and McMillan, there was a little bit of disagreement, and I'll give some background and get your thoughts on it. So basically, TJ, Nate McMillan, the head coach for the Atlanta Hawks, again, all this is, in reports, so everybody's got different sides of the story. But Nate McMillan told Trey Young, he has a policy, TJ, and I've actually watched what other NBA players have said about this. It's really interesting to me, not from a drama, but just from a leadership standpoint. But Nate McMillan has a policy that if you want to start, you have to do the walkthrough day of during shoot around. And Trey Young was getting treatment on his shoulder, and he didn't do the walkthrough. And he said, you'll be coming off the bench. And Trey Young decided to stay home and not go to the game. And, and so it became this kind of big deal. A private matter became public, and Trey Young got a little testy with a reporter, and there's been a lot of back and forth about it. And there's a lot of talking points on it. But let me just get your opening thoughts on the whole thing.
It's so interesting. I think that these battles are being fought all of the time, not just at the NBA level. I mean, they're being fought at every level, and it can be any number of circumstances. I think we've talked about it before that ideally we don't make too many rules because it puts us in a little bit of a bind when we have to do that. But if he has a really good, belief in that, hey, it's important that you see the early game plan, you have to be at the walkthrough. And that means you're coming off the bench if you're not. If that's one of his rules, I don't imagine Nate McMillan has 1,000, but if that's one of them, maybe one of those 3 or 4 rules that just everybody's got to abide by, then I think the rule is the rule. And I got to be honest, though, it is getting harder at every level to enforce those, to hold accountability to those. All of the, you deal with this, Sam. We all deal with it. Well, I had a dentist appointment. Well, I was coming back from Chris. This is one of the common ones. I saw Deion Sanders talking about. Kids go home for the break and they know practice is on December 28th at 4 p.m. And sure enough, somebody's not going to get there till 4:30, and what's the punishment for that? So Deion was talking about, leave 48 hours early if you got to. And I've dealt with that in college, and I think we all deal with those types of things. And it's never easy. I mean, it's never easy. So I think clarity up front is really helpful. And for the things that you have, a little bit of leeway for, that you'll give some leeway for, don't make a rule for it. And I think you got to decide what's worth making a rule and what's not worth making a rule.
Yeah, and I'm full disclaimer. I'm a Hawks fan. I want to see the Hawks do well. I've been a fan my entire life, and Trae Young's a very skilled and accomplished young player. TJ, he's put up incredible numbers. The one thing from afar that I've watched is, to me, a lack of leadership or lack of accountability. And I say that, somewhat ignorantly. I'm not there every day. I don't see it, but I watch games. I've heard about some practices. I've talked to people, and so you watch. And so one piece, you want your superstar player to be the most accountable of themselves, of the team, of their teammates. And if the star player, your best player, isn't leading in front, it's going to be really challenging to play for anything of significance. I've seen this. It's what I've always said about James Harden, one of the most gifted offensive players we've ever seen. But the lack of or minimal commitment on the defensive end, to me, puts a ceiling on what the team is capable of. And I see that with Trae. And so in this incident, there's a lot. 2 things can be true. I like what you said. I'm not really big on like a bunch of rules, but as a coach, you have some rules in place, and so you have some standards, and they're there for a reason. And so hopefully, and I'm sure Nate McMillan has something in place and he has a why behind it, and that's what he believes in. And so it's not asking much for a professional grown man to follow in suit with that. And that's just what he has. And that's part of, doing that and running the team. And so then it's like, well, obviously there's a major disconnect here. If Trey's not willing to do it, there's a rub. Well, we know what happens in the NBA, and most coaches listening to this aren't NBA or professional coaches, and so, what happens when you don't get along with your star player? What happens when you don't get along with that best player? There's going to be challenges for the whole team. So, you've coached a lot of really good players, All-Americans, and sometimes they come with more baggage. What do coaches listening and leaders listening, do about that?
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting topic from this standpoint here is you're going to have a wide variety of players, whether it's a superstar or not a superstar, like you're going to deal with a wide variety of players. And I think coaches just fall into different categories. It's, my way or the highway, or it's, a player's coach where I kind of ebb and flow with it, or maybe you're somewhere in between. And one, you got to be true to yourself first. Like what are the most important things? I always say this, what are the most important things for you to teach? And so I'm somewhere in between. I tell the guys, your hats, your rings, you can do whatever you want. You can be who you are. As long as you're working on your heart, I'm worried about the inside and not the outside. Right. And I've talked to a lot of coaches that don't agree with that. And they think that there should be some stricter, harder rules, which I got no problem with if that's what's true to you. But there are also sometimes when you give a lot of freedom, give an inch, take a mile, like that can happen. And so there's some times where I'm sure Nate McMillan knows what it's like to work with pros and says, you can do this, you can do that, but you got to be at walkthrough. And that's one of his things. And I'm sure he's not a hard liner all of the time, which I bet it'd be virtually impossible to do in the NBA. I mean, you and I have both heard some horror stories from people in the NBA, coaches that work there, and some things that happen, in the locker room, at halftime, after the game. You hear some things, and sometimes some of the stories I hear, I'm not sure it's not more like the WWE, the World Wrestling Federation, where it's a little bit just more of a show than it is a game. But here's the biggest problem in all of it to me, Sam, is not that they're doing what they're doing, because I don't know what it's like to coach 82 games and make $25 million a year and stay in 5-star hotels. I don't know what that's like. I don't know what the whole entertainment business and all that is like. But the problem is that our young kids are watching that. Therefore, the problems trickle down to college and high school and whatever it might be. And so we will deal with these on a different scale, but we will continue to deal with these because when Trey Young is going against the coach or, whoever it might be. And I don't know the Trey Young story, but James Harden or Kevin Durant or, whoever that might be, kids watch that and they take a side of that, and whatever side they take of that is what they think that they can do or how much they're willing to buck the system in certain situations. And so that's what I don't like about it is that, even the good and the bad, you and I talked about this, Steph Curry, he's changed the game of basketball, not intentionally, but probably for the bad in some ways, where kids' shot selection is just crazy. So he didn't do anything negative. He didn't personally do anything wrong. But what they do does affect the game, whether it's on the court or off the court, trickling down to all of us coaching at other levels for sure.
And listen, when I've listened over the last few days about other NBA players speaking on this who live that life, what I think it brings the bigger picture is what they say is it's, every coach has different policy. And I heard Kendrick Perkins and Richard Jefferson speak on it, Matt Barnes. And what's interesting is they'll say, well, hey, your star player, sometimes gets star treatment. And that's just what it is what it is. And then I've heard other players say, well, somewhat, but also they fall in line. Perkins played with Kevin Garnett in Boston. And Doc Rivers sometimes would tell KG if he wasn't going to play, say, I don't want you at the gym. I don't want you coming to the game. You stay away from, because KG was such a competitor and he'd be miserable to be around. And then, somebody else who's been around other superstars, I got to imagine the great ones like a Steph, Tim Duncan, to some degree, Michael Jordan, they understood, even though they were the star, that they fell in line with the team standards. and they didn't try to rise above it or sidestep it. And I don't know, that's just an interesting conversation to me, that how much you treat every player differently. You know why? They're different personalities. So how Nate McMillan coaches Trey Young is different than how he coaches Clint Capella, I'm sure, because they're different personalities. But then you want the entire team to fall under a similar standard of how we're going to operate. And that's an art of coaching. That's the art of leadership that is often missed here. And I think that's the bigger thing I'm speaking to, is like, where's the nuance? How do you approach that? I know it's an art for a reason. The science is black and white. The art is gray and multi-cut. Like, how do you work through that with different players and different personalities?
Yeah, well, leadership is messy, and I think it speaks more to the relationship between the coach and the player in this situation, that it kind of got to this point a little bit. I think there's probably more underlying, and I think we've kind of heard that in Atlanta reports, but I think there's just more underlying in that. And honestly, like, I don't mean this in a negative or vice way, but I think the reality is Nate knows Trey needs to grow up. Trey Young needs to grow up if he's going to advance his game to the next level and become an elite pro and lead a team to a championship. And he's fighting that with him. But all of us fight those types of battles. I mean, it could be our high school junior that they need to be a little bit less unselfish, or they need to talk more, or they need whatever. We're always fighting these little battles. And this seems to be a battle that they are fighting, is that he wants him to mature to the next level of competitiveness, to the team to go to the next level, and to do those little things well. And this is a little thing, but obviously it's a big thing to Coach McMillan, that he wants that done. Now, here's what I think is really interesting in all of this is that, flashback to The Last Dance, and Michael Jordan, one of the greatest players ever, like, he encourages Phil Jackson to let Rodman go to Vegas for a while. You know what I mean? And so that is an example of all things are not equal and level in leadership. But here's the problem with that, is that Michael Jordan probably wouldn't have said that for Tony Kukoc or somebody else, right? And so then other players have these perceptions, and all of these things that go outside the norm of the team cause some thought for different players. They're thinking, well, okay, I think coach isn't playing me because of this. I think this guy's getting special treatment. I get it. And you said it before, but like, when there is no communication, there's a void in communication, like, that just gets filled up with a lot of people's thoughts. So I think the most important thing in this is that there be communication. In this situation, guys, I have a rule on walkthrough. Trey is not going to do that. Therefore, he's not going to play. Trey and I need to work through this, and we know we still need Trey, whatever it might be. There needs to be communication, because on the outside, I don't even think it's as big between Nate McMillan and Trey Young. I think it's how everybody else perceives it. You might be having a problem with your star player or the last person on your bench. How everybody else perceives it is actually probably more important than the two people having the disagreement or trying to grow through something together.
Yeah, that's a good point. I agree 100% in that. Like, leadership, sometimes private moments are important between a coach and a player. One of our mutual friends had a situation last year where they took over a program, and they were one of the best players was an attitude. This is at the high school level, attitude problem, effort problem, but was one of the top 2-3 players on the team. And this coach was trying to really work through it with this player privately, and was, we're midway deep into the season, 2/3 of the way through, and it kind of come to a head where things weren't improving at the rate that he was trying to get it to. And eventually he started addressing this player in front of the group and calling him out. And after the season, he was having debriefs and end of the season meetings with players. What he realized was there were some of the other players on the team, TJ, who had lost respect for the coach, who was trying to do it the right way and do it privately. But the other players, to your point, perceived him to just be letting things go. And they didn't know behind the scenes. So there was a void in communication. The quote is like, where there's a void in communication, it's filled with negativity. So if you don't communicate, it will be filled. It's not going to be like, you know what? Coach is just doing the best he can. very few people are going to feel that. Or you're in a marriage. It's like, you know what, my wife, very few people, like, yeah, they're just doing the best with what they can. No, it's going to be filled with negativity. So you better control the perception. I shouldn't use the word control. You better communicate. You better let people know what the reality is and not leave them up to their own thoughts to perceive what they're going to perceive in a team environment. Private matters can be private, but then you have to let everybody else know what's going on in any team, company, organization, or people just going to run with their thoughts, and that's not going to be a good thing.
Yeah, and I think, as we're watching The Last Dance with Jordan, I think that even sometimes like over communication, direct communication or whatever is better than no communication, because I think when you look at that, I wouldn't say Jordan was a great communicator of like uplifting people and building their confidence and whatever, but I also think nobody doubted where he stood or Phil Jackson stood. It's like, hey, Rodman's going to Vegas. When he gets back, he'll be better for it. Let's play on. So it didn't leave a lot of room for people to think, and it's kind of a dictatorship. That is what it is, and this is where it's at, and we're letting him go. And people agreed or disagreed with it, but it wasn't a lot of like guessing. And I think that's where a lot of problems arise in a culture, where there's a lot of guessing. And that's where I've talked about it before, but the gray area. I don't know what your black and white is, but it's a lot better when it is black and white. And the gray area, and can't speak for the Hawks, but like, what are other players thinking? What are other people thinking within the program? Are Trae and Nate McMillan even talking about this? Obviously, this feud's been going on for a while. Those are the type of things. They're just gray. They're just messy. You're trying to work through it with a player, but everybody else thinks you're favoring other players. They're losing respect for you on that. Goes back to so many things in life come down to communication.
Yeah, and I want to say something. Like TJ and I recognize, if you're listening, like coaching NBA and coaching high school or even college is not an apples to apples comparison. You've got professional paid players, you've got agents involved, you've got lots of more, you got media at a high level. And so people are trying to protect their image. And so they may say something in front of a microphone and say something differently behind scenes, and then agents jump in. And so it's just more convoluted. But there are commonalities. There are things that we can draw, which is why we're talking about. There's things we can draw from this. And so my final thought on this whole situation is building off what you're saying, TJ. I think what we're learning is communication is a big part of leadership. And if you don't be intentional with your communication, if you're not intentional with building the relationship through that and being consistent with your better players and anybody on your roster, but really your better players, you do run the risk of losing the respect of your team. You run the risk of losing your job, losing games, a season going downhill and down the toilet pretty quick. So that's my big thing is like, you better be sincere and intentional with your communication and not leave things up to imagination.
Yeah. And last thing I would say about that particular situation is just like, I think it's important for coaches to go into it and know what's negotiable and what's non-negotiable in your program. And I think it's healthy for players to know that as well, because I think it's okay to have things that are non-negotiable and things that are negotiable, and to say sorry when you make a mistake, to work through problems and issues that happen. And I also think it's okay to have some things that are non-negotiable, like this is the team. And I think as long as players think you're fair about what you're doing, I think they can live with it. I think when things become unfair, and that's, I guess, open to perspective right there, right? But when they view that as unfair, you have some problems. But I think it's okay to have rules or standards or whatever, you might deem them to be, as long as they are fair. And I think that if you know what your point of I'm not coming back, this is a non-negotiable is, then I think live with it. And I think sometimes we make non-negotiables because we think we're going to avoid problems because of it. And a lot of times that's not true, because we work in messiness of leadership.
Yeah. And I set up my last thing. I think what you triggered too. Last point I would say on this is coaches oftentimes are afraid to coach the star or the best player because they're afraid that they'll lose them or they'll hurt the relationship. And in reality, what you just did is you lost your whole team and you lost that player. They're going to transfer. They're going to leave at the end of the season anyways because they don't respect you. And so don't be afraid to hold the line with your best player, and not like a hard butt, that's, my way or the highway, but just holding the line and holding the standard. I think that's important. Look, let's go to number 2 here, NBA thing that we can all draw something from and speak on. And so let's talk about this Russel Westbrook with the Lakers, TJ, who has been delegated to a 6-man role. And this is somebody that's put up kind of a Hall of Fame career and been a star player and been a top 10 player in the league by a lot of people's opinions, and then being asked to come off the bench. That's hard, at any level. When your role changes within your career or within a season, for a player to accept that, which it might be better for the team, but worse for the individual. And this is something every coach can resonate with, or most coaches can, that you've got players on your roster who you need to buy into a role that they may not like, but you think is going to benefit the team. So let's talk about this one.
Yeah. First of all, I think there's something bigger here that coaches all deal with at every single level. And that is that just inserting player A who's good, player C who's good, and player D who's good doesn't make you good. I think back to Dwayne Wade and LeBron James and their first go around it, they struggled. They did 1-1, it didn't equal 3, it just equaled 2. And all of us at any level of coaching have dealt with this. I deal with this almost every single year, that, this is my best post player, this is my best guard, this is my best wing or whatever. And you just assume with your best players on the court, that's all going to, just work out and be fine. But I think Russell Westbrook is a classic case of like, gosh, and it's questionable whether he can win a championship or whatever playing his way, but we also know he can average a triple-double in a certain role. But then you put him on a team with LeBron James and Anthony Davis, his role changes. It's really different to him. He might not thrive in that role. I mean, another example of that is like when Kawhi Leonard went down and Paul George, everyone's talking about Paul George. He's not living up to the hype. He's not going, well, Kawhi goes down, Paul George goes crazy, and he's averaging like 30 and 10 and so I think it's something to be mindful for all coaches, that just because certain players have skill sets or abilities or whatever it might be, getting them to play together, finding the right offense, finding the right defense, getting them to be able to be in their sweet spots a lot, and being able to be in a place where, 1-1 equals more than 2. Like, that's a really hard thing to do in coaching. I mean, you see this happen every year, at the NBA level. I mean, you could even say the Golden State Warriors coming off a championship, people are like, are they going to lose a game next year? I think they're below 500 right now. Like, there's so much that goes into coaching to figure that out. Just because you have good players doesn't always mean that it's going to be easy and that you're just going to go out there and win games. And so I think that the big thing, I know, obviously changing role, finding Russell's sweet spot, how he can help the team most, him learning how to fill in the role. There's so many angles we could take on this, but the angle that sticks out to me the most is just how hard it is to actually put the best team in the best situation on the court. That's not an easy thing to do.
Good point. When Coach K took over the Dream Team, which is now called the Redeem Team, or the Olympic Team, excuse me, not the Dream Team, but when he took over that team, he said something interesting. He said he wanted every player to bring their ego to the table. He wanted them to be themselves and bring that bravado or that confidence. Yet at the same time, he needed everybody to humble themselves. They were all stars, superstars, best player on their team, and he wanted them to bring that confidence, yet you've got to bring humility. And that's what I think about here. In any good team, there better be a level of humility across the board from everybody, coaches and players, or ego is going to get in the way, and ego is the enemy. And so as a coach, if you're a coach listening, my question would be, how are you teaching humility? How are you modeling humility? How are you bringing that out in your players while also allowing them to step into their confidence and their ego? And those are hard things to accomplish as a leader and as a coach. But I think again, in this situation, if you don't have that, then everybody thinks that they've got all the answers. And so it's just really important that you are able to get people to believe in your message. And here's the next thing on it. How do you get your players to buy into the role that they're given? And we've done, past shows on this, but buying into that role by knowing it doesn't have to be the role forever for them. It's just what they need right now.
Yeah, and this is one of those things of getting, 1 and 1 to equal 3, everybody filling their role. That could be less minutes, that could be more minutes, that could be being in the right spots, that could be coming off the bench, that could be getting shots in the right places. There's everybody, figuring that out is a really, really hard thing to do. I mean, coaching is really hard. And, going from a places of X's and O's and player development and all that type to get them in the right places, then you got to go over to the mental part, what you're talking about, the ego. Well, I think I'm this. Well, I think I should be getting those shots. And you've heard me tell that Skip Prosser story before, but, 2,000, students liked him and their parents. And then all of a sudden they cut it down to 15, and then he cut it to 5. And then, before he got down to the end, the second player thought he should get them, as many shots as the first best player. And the first best player thought he should get more scholarship offers. And it's just really hard to please people. It's just really hard to fill all of that. I mean, I know that even as a parent, a lot of times coaching falls short of my expectations. And I have to remind myself they're doing the best with what they can and what they have and what they know, because we all see it through the eyes of our child. And when you talk about the NBA, you're talking about a guy with a really big ego seeing it through his eyes. And honestly, it's a really good lesson. It's a hard lesson, but to be able to step back and to fill a role that you may not even want to fill and do it with grace and do it with great effort. I think more people than not cannot fill that role. They can't do that. And I think it's because we're too prideful, because maybe the voices in our ear, and we as coaches, I think we have to be sensitive to that. Not that we have to accept it, but we have to be sensitive to that, is that the majority of people will not accept anything less than the absolute, probably beyond what they expected result. They want to be given the most shots. They want to be given a star role. They want to be going. And so that is one of the things that I think wears coaches out. And I think we have to make peace with that, because oftentimes I fight that and I can't make peace with it because I'm doing the best I can. I've coached for a long time. I've won a lot of games. Why won't these 18 to 22-year-olds buy into what I'm saying? And look, it's a really, really hard battle. And I think it's a good mixture of, praising them, giving them confidence, helping them to have direct talks with them to understand why their role is their role. Goes back to the same thing we said in the first, you probably can't over communicate this with people. You probably can't have enough conversations, because very seldom do you ever put people in their roles and everybody just loves it.
Yeah. Well, you just said too about that piece, you're coaching 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds right now, and you've won championships, you won games, but even you just kind of said, these are my words, is you have to remove your ego and say, well, they don't care about what happened in 2010. They care about, how are you, Coach Rosine, going to help me, this player in 2022, become the best player and have a big role on this team. And I think about that anytime I'm working, sometimes right now I'm working with younger kids, and it's I'm trying to get them to buy, and I'm trying to get them to take on a role, to do the things that I think are going to help them or help the team. And reality is, every player, they may respect the coach, but you got to build a relationship with that individual player and show them and get them to believe in whatever it is that you're trying, not sell them. That's not the right thing to say, but you're trying to get them to believe in what you're telling them that they need to do. And so, again, a lot of nuance here, and leadership isn't easy.
Yeah. I mean, I personally battle with this. I mean, you think about it. I mean, what did we just say over the last 30 minutes? Coaching sucks. Coaching's hard. Nobody's going to appreciate what you do. Nobody's going to like their role. If you have some rules, they're probably not going to like your rules. If you don't have enough rules, people are probably going to get out of hand. I mean, there is no just clean cut good answers. And I think that's what people want. I mean, I think that you go through and you try and plant seeds in whatever it is, 12-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 20-year-olds, you try and go and you try and plant these seeds and you try and develop them, make them better. And oftentimes you don't even get to see the results of that until 10, 20 years down the road. Like that's one of the reasons that I think almost all of us contemplate, like, should I be doing this like once or twice a year? Like you're asking yourself, like, is there some other thing that I should do? And I think it's just the constant reminder to coaches to be encouraged that what you're doing does matter, and you often won't get to reap the rewards of it instantly. And that there's going to be a lot of frustrations. You're definitely not going to be able to please everybody. You're more likely to have less pleased than you are have the majority pleased. Even if you're winning in that situation, you're probably going to have unhappy people. And so just a reminder to coaches of like how hard the job is and what they do does matter despite how hard it is, and to stay encouraged, because honestly, I need more people encouraging me. I feel this several times a year, like, my gosh, like this is hard. Like this is really frustrating. And I just got to keep fighting the good fight.
And a last point for me on it too, TJ, and hearing what you just said, it's a reminder too, build a culture, build a program, build a team that goes much beyond whether you win or lose a game. And not diminishing that. That's a huge part. Everything we're talking about, having roles and putting people in positions, putting the 5 best players out there, trying to score points, get stops on defense, become a better shooter, become a better finisher, run better action, set better screens. Like that is all a part of it. And one of the reasons we coach and one of the reasons we love it. But also building a program where it goes beyond that. So it's not trivial. And when you hit a 3-game losing streak, the walls aren't caving in and you feel like quitting and retiring and resigning. And you start counting down the days until the final game. Like, let it be so much more and so much more giving to yourself, to your team. Build a relationship where celebrating each other is common, where we talk openly about things that we're struggling. We're providing support to people that it just goes beyond that. And that's where it can fill your cup when it maybe it's getting emptied a little bit. And that, again, none of this is easy. Nobody said it was easy. It's defeating at times, but it's also rewarding. And you got to fight for these things, and you got to work for them, and you got to thrive for them and strive for them. And so I think that's a reminder too for coaches and leaders listening, and players. Look, players too. If you're a player listening and you're a leader, know, like, yeah, you're more committed than most of your teammates, if not all of them. You're working harder than they are. You're putting in more reps. You're trying to get this other kid to buy in and be more positive, stop being negative, and you feel like you're not making any inroads there. We'll keep with it. Like, this is part of it.
Yeah, I got one final thing here, Sam, and it's really more of a question. I think a topic we should do in the future, something I've been wrestling with, but is actually building a strong culture will require us to fight against culture. When I think about that right now, I think about some of the things that we would instill in a really good culture. And I think one of the reasons it's getting harder and harder to build a really strong culture is because the lessons that we probably would teach in a strong culture fight against our culture. And that could be something from, humility to not celebrating self, to lifting up others above yourself, to talking openly, to sharing your feelings, to being vulnerable, to earn it the hard way versus the quick fix. And you think about the things specifically in Western civilization, probably the whole world right now, a lot of the lessons that we would teach that would strengthen a good culture, there somebody or something, maybe social media or whatever, is fighting against that every day. In some senses, it could be the parents fighting against it, like, hey, be selfish and sacrifice. They go home and they say, no, your coach is wrong. You should be playing more. Go fight for what's yours. Or it could be social media coming back and saying, hey, you know what? Celebrate yourself. Tell everybody how great things are. Don't share any of your vulnerabilities. Like I've contemplated this a lot lately, but is actually building a good culture require you to fight against the culture?
Great point. I love that line. Yeah. Building a good culture requires you to fight against the culture. It's so true. And it's something you got to talk about, I think, every day with your team. You got to believe it, number one, as a coach. If you don't believe it, don't do it. But that's something I do with teams I coach is just talk about being a great teammate, that scoring isn't everything, that being a good person matters, and that stuff that kids need to hear. That I really think they need to hear it. So that's a great point, TJ. Let's go to our third topic here from the NBA, and that is Kyrie Irving, who's dominated the headlines at different times over the last year or two for different reasons. So why don't you unpack this situation, TJ, and open up this conversation?
When we're talking about this one, I don't think this is a long one. I think it's really quick. I mean, I think people saw his anti-Semitic post and the things that he said. And, I don't think this is a first for Kyrie. I think this has happened often where he says something that, controversial, probably at minimum, hurtful, probably at the high end. I mean, there's just a lot of things that have been said and comments that have been made. How does that matter? I mean, this one's probably least relatable, but does relate to coaches in a way. I think the most important probably lesson we could get from it is that what we say matters. We definitely live in a time where the things that we say matter, whether it's on social media, whether it's to the player in the locker room, whether it's on the bus, whatever it might be, that now more than ever, we have to be careful about what we say. And I think coaching can be a dangerous spot because in the heat of the moment, how many times have you said something you didn't mean to say? And I'm not saying Kyrie did that. I'm just kind of the tying it to coaches and warning against that. Is Kyrie is probably saying these things not in the heat of the moment, and which probably makes it a little bit more alarming. But as coaches, we're so oftentimes in the battle, in the fire, with issues, with problems. And I think about how many times I've said things to my wife I probably shouldn't have said, or to my kids I probably shouldn't have said because of the heat of the moment. Well, in our profession in coaching, there's many times we're in the heat of the moment, and we can say these things where, like, I mean, Kyrie, significant. Some people not significant enough. What he's been punished and how he's been punished, but losing a Nike contract worth tens of millions of dollars. The pain and hurt he put towards other people, being suspended from games. I mean, there was punishment. Whether you think it's adequate or not is up to each person to decide. But to think that those things that we say or don't matter, I think is a mistake. And even if it's not something that's out there in the public, small things that we say to people matter. That could be something we say to a player that takes away their confidence. It could be something that we say to an assistant coach that belittles them. It could be, and I think it's just a reminder when Kyrie puts something this big out there is how important our words are and how much they matter.
Two things come to my mind on this one. One is a Dick DeVinzio quote. As a leader, you don't have the luxury of minding your own business. Yeah, PGC founder Dick DeVinzio said, you don't have the luxury of minding your own business if you want to be a leader. And the second thing that comes to my mind, TJ, is two words that leaders need to learn how to say. And I'm not going to get into the whole what he said or the political ramifications. But the two words are I'm sorry. Yeah, when you say something wrong or you do something, out of line or out of character or in the heat of a moment, saying I'm sorry goes a long way. And I've learned that in my marriage. I've learned that in relationships. And to do that, guess what you got to have? You got to have humility. You got to have empathy. You got to care about people around you when you're on a team or you're a leader. And so that's what comes to my mind. Say you're sorry when you're a leader because you are going to make mistakes. And then two, if you want to be a leader, you don't have the luxury of minding your own business. But let me turn it back to you on this one, TJ. Do you think that in 2022, do you think players view leadership differently than they did 20 years ago? Meaning, do players have a reluctancy to want to step into a leadership role more so now? Or do you think it does, that hasn't changed over the course of, your coaching career?
Yeah, I think it's definitely changed. And plain and simple, and this probably could be a whole nother podcast. Like, is leadership cool? Is it cool? Like, do we lift up leaders? And so I actually think a lot of times it's cool not to be the leader. It's cool to go down your own path. It's cool to just take your own journey. It's cool to just go get yours. It's cool to and so, yeah, I think the simple just realization that I think you and I probably wanted to be the leader. Not that we were great at it. Actually, you were really good at it, but I wanted to be a leader, and I think I was average at it and had to grow in it. But you and I probably went through teams wanting to be a leader. And we thought, man, it's cool to be the captain. It's cool to be the person that leads this. It's cool to be the person that helps bring the team along to whatever it might be. Just plain and simple, I don't know if it's cool to be a leader anymore. And so I think coaches have to fight that battle as well.
Yeah, and I asked that question. It's not something I've thought a ton about, but it triggers for me. I do think it's become. I can't believe this is the case. I can't believe it's become uncool to not work hard or to make fun of kids that do try hard. That to me is pretty wild. And so I think as coaches, we've got to double down for coaches that believe it. Like, we got to bring that back to being cool. We got to fight that a little bit. Back to your earlier statement, like, you better fight the culture that exists today if you want to build a strong culture. And you got to be, that means now you got to step out and isolate yourself and be willing to step into those conversations and do things different and get kids to believe in what is cool and define what isn't cool. And again, these are things that I'm on, and right now, especially working with younger athletes, I talk about a lot, and then also try to get a vibe or a feel like what's really going on in their everyday life. So, yeah, man, I think that's so true. And so, leadership is, we got to make it cool. We got to get kids to understand the why behind it. You know, we're all leaders, right? We're all leaders inherently. We lead ourselves. We have to lead ourselves. And then there are people in our world, whether it's one person, two people, or 200 people, that we have an impact on. And in that instance, once you have an impact on somebody, you're leading them. It's just whether or not you're going to be intentional about it and take great care in it, or you're just going to be happenstance and kind of let happen what happened.
Yeah, I got one last thing to say before you wrap it up here, Sam. But yeah, I think that when we're speaking about leadership, leadership is, to me, the ability to help others achieve things maybe they didn't think they could or couldn't without you or couldn't with other people in their corner, or and so you're rising up other people. And sometimes it's hard to have followers because people think, well, I'm going to take my own path. I don't need anybody to lead me. And sometimes, it's really difficult to be a leader because it takes sacrifice, it takes work, and the reward is not always personal to you. It's to other people. And it goes back to, one thing that I always love talking to my team about, but this team's not about you, and if you're going to be a great teammate, if you're going to be a leader, in this program, it can't be about you. And again, that's fighting the culture that we're hearing from everybody else, is that it's not about you. You're part of something bigger than you. If you want to go play golf, you can make it about you, as an individual sport, if you want to, whatever it might be. But that's what's so unique. It's what I love about the game. It's what I struggle with about the game. It's what I fight for in the game. It's what hurts me about the game. It's what makes me excited about the game. It's like, you get to be a part of something bigger than yourself, and and you get to be a leader that helps people to achieve those things and try and bring people together, which I think is a unique spot to be in. Whether that's 50 years ago, 20 years ago, or in this moment we're in right now, whether it's harder or not, I think we could talk about it on another podcast. But whether it's important or not, I think has withstood the test of time. Heck yeah, it's important.
Yeah, great conversation, TJ. And again, appreciate everybody listening. We took 3 things from the NBA, like we like to do sometimes from time to time, and talk about what we can draw from it. And look, leadership is messy. Leadership is challenging. Leadership is rewarding. Hit us up. Let us know what you think. We've got players, coaches, leaders, teachers from all different backgrounds and sports all over the world listening. We appreciate you. doing this, and we'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you thought about this conversation. Let us know what you think about it, and talk to us about it. That's TJ, and I am Sam, and we are the Hardwood Hustle.
Thanks again for tuning into this episode of the Hardwood Hustle, where we believe in the value of a coach. Be sure to check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Hardwood_Hustle to stay up to date on the latest episodes and share your thoughts with our coaching community. From the Hardwood Hustle team, thanks again. We can't wait to be with you again next week.